hour, all about the leaning pine. I'm going to turn this story over to our presenters. We have Jim Voorhees from the class of 72, Jack Skelly, also the class of 72, and Dr. Kurt Stager. Paul Pillis was expected to join us this evening. He may pop in, so don't be surprised if he jumps on here. He's class of 69, but he's traveling right now down south somewhere, and he wasn't sure if he'd make it on. So without further ado, Jim Voorhees, it's all you.
Okay, thank you. So good evening, everybody. It's nice to have so many people on board to listen to this little story or big story. And the way I'll start out is I kind of got inspired last summer after years and years, just like a lot of you folks have. We've heard different stories, rumors. I mean, I've read conflicting stories, printed stories of what happened with the leaning pine. And I just thought I'd make an effort to try to sort out what was accurate, what wasn't. So I did a lot of research with it, talked to a lot of different people, quite a few people from the class of 73. They were the students at the time that were involved with the tree coming down, which is part of the story, but it's not the whole story of the leaning pine. So talked to many of those folks, talked to a lot of employees. Paul Pillis helped me set up a discussion with Eddie Hoyt that day in November of 1971. Eddie told Gould, I don't want to go to school today. I want to go to the school with you. And Gould let him. And so thank you, Paul, for that discussion with Eddie. Mike Reichland helped me do a discussion with Eileen Frary, who was President Buxton's secretary, and she was in that administration building for a very, very long time. And that's just some of the people that participates. And I'll be mentioning some other names along the way. Some of the people's names I'm not going to mention. I didn't ask permission to use their names, some of the folks from 73, but I actually talked to about 25 people to try to put this together. So my goal, again, was to try and confirm anything I had heard or I had read, to try to sort out, again, what was accurate and what wasn't. You know, just an example of one of the rumors, in talking with Heather at the beginning of this, she had told me, oh, you know, she had heard so many rumors. One of them was even a chainsaw was involved. And when I was talking to Bob Burrell about this, he had even brought it up that a chainsaw was involved. Just as an example of one of the rumors that we had heard. So I'm going to get right in after those opening remarks and get right into the story. So about a little over 160 years ago, in the late 1850s, Daniel Saunders was with Paul Smith. They were out on Lower Saranac Lake. And the story goes that they came to shore to have lunch. So they were sitting on the shore. And Daniel suggested to Paul, you need to build a bigger, nicer hotel than he had at that point. At that point, Paul had a simple, very plain facility referred to as Hunter's Home, and the guys would show up and Paul would guide for them. But a lot of these people, Daniel Saunders, the gentleman, Mr. Loomis, they all encouraged Paul to make or build a better hotel somewhere. And so those words stuck with Paul from Daniel, to build a place on the shores of Lower Saranac or Lower St. Regis Lake. And it evolved to where, as we all know, he built a hotel there and never stopped building a whole building on that property, I think. So at that time, we could all picture the Leaning Pine was in a forest. It was in a wood lot. And at some point during, as his facility grew and grew, at some point, like the picture shows here, the land, the property around the Leaning Pine was cleared out. So at some point, someone made a conscious decision this tree was unique and it shouldn't come down. And in talking with Paul today, because he wasn't sure he was going to show up, Paul relayed a message that Gould used to talk about, that there were a lot of individual, very majestic white pine on the property and some hemlocks around the whole property. And Paul Smith felt as though they had more value to the customers that were going to go there, just to be a part of that area, the mature, beautiful, large, majestic trees, that they were more valuable than if he'd have taken them down and had them taken over to his sawmill. So again, we could just, at some point, someone made a conscious decision to keep the Leaning Pine, just like it's shown here in that picture. So then we jump to the college days. And this part of the story is going to kind of talk about how it became the logo, the symbol of the college. So in 1947, the student council sponsored a contest for the student body to come up with a logo for the college. Well, John Hayduck drew a sketch of the Leaning Pine, and he won the contest, and that stuck as the beginning of the symbol, the logo for the college. In 1948, in the St. Region, the yearbook, right in the beginning of the yearbook, there's the first picture that I'm aware of the Leaning Pine in the oval that we're all familiar with. And actually, I didn't catch it. When I was with Heather about a week ago, she pointed it out to me that it was that early, well, really the very first yearbook. So keeping going on with this kind of background of the Leaning Pine as the symbol of the college, the logo, I went through every yearbook that's in the library, page by page, looking for different examples of what you're seeing now on the screen here in the 1954 yearbook, the St. Region. But in 1952, it was, again, now this is not in the St. Region. In 1952, the first postscript showed the logo in their headlines. Now, the postscript was like a newsletter. And so there was a big title, the postscript. Well, again, in 1952, they had the word post and then the Leaning Pine oval and then script. And that was the first time that it showed up. Well, there we go. That was the first time it showed up in the postscript, the newsletter. So then in 1953, the Leaning Pine was on the cover of the St. Region, and it was inside. There was a picture of the Leaning Pine with the caption, "The Leaning Pine bids you welcome." Going forward again, in 1954, the Leaning Pine was in the oval on the front cover of the St. Region. And I believe that was the first time it was on the cover of the St. Region, the Leaning Pine in the oval. In 1961, though, it was the first time that I had seen the Leaning Pine mentioned as the symbol of the college. It was in the St. Regis in this yearbook. And so inside of it, the leaning pine inside that yearbook, it's mentioned for the first time that it's actually the symbol of the college. So through this whole time period, through the 50s, and it continues on through the 60s, it's kind of random of where you see it, where you don't in the St. Regis. It appeared in some nice pictures. There wasn't a lot of verbiage with the picture. I did not research the postscript as much as I went through the St. Regis. In December 71, now the tree is down, but I'm going to stick with the logo here. In December of 1971, the postscript had a picture of the leaning pine on the ground, and the caption was "Gone but not forgotten." And that was December 1971. The tree came down in November of 1971 that we'll get to. In 1972, the St. Regis did a very nice tribute to the leaning pine. In 1974, there was a really nice picture of Gould Hoyt, and right above Gould's picture was the emblem of the Forestry Club that has the leaning pine, the saw, there's an axe. That was 1974. So I'm gonna, I want to continue with the logo for another couple of minutes here. When Buxton retired in the later 1970s, President Steinbach was the next president. And there were a lot of things going on at the college then. The Buxton era was over. There were a lot of new trustees. There was a lot of change that they were talking about. Excuse me. And President Steinbach decided it was time to change the emblem too. And so I'm going to put the cover of this book up here. And if you see this symbol right here, they look like two S's here. This replaced the leaning pine as the new symbol of the college. Jack, you had some information on what that symbol, what George Peroni thought about it. What did you say, Jack?
Well, George and I were pretty close, and one evening we were discussing the new logo, and he referred to it as two snakes mating. And by the way, I want you to know where that logo came from. Because now that you're talking about it, I mean, things like this, 50 years ago or thereabouts, the synapses don't fire that well. But I remember that logo came from someone they hired in order to come up with a new logo or a new symbol of the college. And they hired a consultant to come up with that logo. And they found that logo on Lydia Martin Smith's stationery. And that's how that logo came about, and because it was on her stationery. Now, I believe Lydia Martin Smith was married to Paul. So that's how the new logo got started, found on her stationery.
Oh,
But George had George had a keener insight as to what it really was.
That's good. So that logo stuck around until somewhere around 83, 84, 85. And then they went back to the leaning pine in the oval. But the point is, for a period of time, it wasn't the college symbol. So we're done with that logo subject. So moving on to the tragedy. First of all, I'd like to thank Doug Fitzgerald for pointing out a book that turned out to be very valuable to me in researching all this. When we were at the campground cleanup days in September, we were talking a little bit about this. I think I told him that I was starting to do this, and he brought up that I really needed to get a copy of the Paul Smith's College book, 1937 to 1980, by James Woods. And my wife found it online right away, sent for, got a used copy of it. And it's very interesting. It especially the part that does describe what happened on campus, how it went, the tree coming down, the confession that we're going to talk about. And so, Doug, that was, thanks for that advice, for getting that book. And anybody that's interested in this in our college, I highly recommend it. It's kind of difficult in the beginning to read. There's a lot of pages about the college trying to get going in the late 30s, early 40s, the end of the Depression, World War II starting, and a lot of it is what the trustees were going through. But once you get past that, I think it's very, very interesting. So thanks again, Doug. So the story of the tree coming down, the leaning pine. So on November 11th, 1971, the forestry students had to pick up their equipment, the axe, from the gym. And it was about 11 o'clock at night, apparently. And again, I had discussions with about 5 individuals from the class of 1973. A couple of them were eyewitnesses to something that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But we got some good information from the class of 1973. So many of the grades, a lot of the grades were lower than the students' expectations were, and it created a lot of anger. And so as some of the students started, leaving the gym and going back to their dorms, several of them started chopping at the tree. And a couple of the students that I had talked to from 73 witnessed that as they walked by the leaning pine heading to their dorm. They were from over by dorm 9 and 10. So they were heading sort of, it was obviously that they were going to go past the leaning pine. In talking with them, I'm pretty sure they thought that that's when the leaning pine was going to come down, and it didn't. So they went back. The story goes that one of the individuals went back to his dorm. They suspect had a few drinks, maybe something else, and just kind of festered. And he recruited an additional student to go back with him and finish the job. And this was around 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm not going to mention the individuals' names. It's documented. It's been written in different things. I'm just not going to bring up the names. For quite a while, I had considered contacting the individual, which I was pretty sure I could. And I simply decided not to open up old wounds. And so I didn't. Because again, through the whole thing, I was always trying to confirm anything I had read or any rumors that I had heard of. So it was just part of the process of thinking of possibly getting a hold of them to talk and confirm some things. So they go back, and again, the tree goes down somewhere between 2 and they go back at 2 o'clock in the morning, and then closer to 3 o'clock in the morning, which would have been November 12th, 1971, the leaning pine came down. So a couple of years ago, I see Leonard Flath occasionally. He comes to a lot of the alumni events in the capital region where I'm from. And we've had a lot of great conversations. And actually, probably a couple of years ago, he had told me his experience with what happened that night. So Leonard Flath was the assistant, I think he was the assistant dean of students, something like that. And so they would call Leonard when things like this would happen. So Leonard was called, he goes to the tree and he notices two sets of footprints leading away from the tree, going towards Route 30. And that's exactly what, it had snowed that night, which a couple of the eyewitness students had told me that it was snowing a lot that night. So that fits together. So Leonard is following the footsteps up to Route 30. Leonard says they take a right, they're heading south on Route 30, and a state trooper comes by, sees Leonard, pulls over, and they knew each other. And he asked Leonard, "What are you doing?" Leonard filled him in, and the two of them continue to follow the footprints. So Twombly shows up, and Gray Twombly shows up and puts a stop to their investigation. And that was the end of it. They did not continue on. My theory on that is that Twombly knew that Buxton kept everything in-house at the school. He wasn't big into the government. All of the business in the college stayed within. And my theory on this story is that when Twombly saw the state trooper, he did not want it to continue. I suspect that if just Leonard was there, that Twombly and Leonard Flath would have continued on, and the story might have been a lot shorter, but that didn't happen. I talked to Pat Flath about this and told her this whole story, and as she remembers, she said that this is exactly the way she remembers it, how that with Leonard and the state trooper and Twombly. So kind of an interesting part of this whole thing. So this Buxton's secrecy, or wanting to keep everything in house, it's in James Wood's book, the Paul Smith College 1937 to 1980. He writes quite a bit about this, and I'm looking for, Bob Seidenstein also wrote quite a bit about Buxton being like this in the recent article that he wrote in the spring of 2021, and then it was reprinted in the 75th anniversary newspaper supplement that went out. Bob talks quite a bit writes quite a bit about how Buxton was very private. So there had been some disgruntled students before this time. And the story goes that there were other students in the past that had taken some chops at the tree. There was a good wound, some injuries there. I'm not exactly sure the timeline there, but at some point, Gould patched the wound with concrete. And so they knew that there was, a volume of concrete in the trunk. So as a result of that, Gould and Jim Krause and Katzman, who was another teacher at the time teaching Introduction to Forestry and some other forestry classes, several of them went to the dorms, knocking on rooms, looking for an axe that had a chip in it because they knew the concrete was there and they felt as though that might have been one way where they could find the individuals that took it down. Some of the people that I had talked to, they had knocked on their doors, looking for the axes like that. I think Hans Michelin was one of them that they knocked on his door, looking for some axes. And a couple of the other students from the class of 73, they were ones that people had knocked on their door. I remember standing right where this picture is, that the next morning, standing next to Professor Hunt, one of the forestry professors, and I still remember him saying, well, it looks like there's more than one axe had participated in this job. Well, there may have been many axes in the beginning and then a couple axes at the end, but I still remember standing next to Professor Hunt the next morning. Jack, do you remember anything that next day? Did anything happen in the dorm you might have been at where the professors came looking for axes?
Well, it was I think it was early morning, and I was in dorm 9, room 8. And of course, this occurred in November of 71. So, I was a first semester sophomore, and I remember very distinctly. I think, I'm not sure about this, but I think it was Bill Goki that knocked on my door and asked to see my axe, because he knew that I was a forester because I had worked for Mr. Goki, sweeping out dorms and shoveling snow on the walks and what have you. And I do believe it was Goki, and he asked to see my axe, and I showed it to him. And of course, it was in good shape. And that's what I recall about that evening. But it was not the following morning. It was early morning, as I remember.
Yeah, early morning on November 12th.
Right.
Yeah. So they never found a chip in the axe. No one came forward and admitted it. Investigation continued. And in March of 1972, one of those two individuals that finished the job finally confessed to the state troopers. And at that time, he implicated the other individual. The other individual had already left school, had quit. And the individual that confessed, he was quickly brought the administration building, and he was told he was going to be expelled. And the story, that part of the story kind of finishes that the school settled with the individuals that there ended up being a $2,500 fine. That was it. There was no jail time. There are rumors that one or two of them did go to jail. I have heard from one of the past administrators at the time, well, employees at the time, that there may have been one of them did go to jail, but it was not over the Leaning Pine coming down. That I don't know if that contributed to that particular rumor, but according to all the records, no one went to jail over it. Kurt, you want to chime in here now with the disc that is part of the tree?
Sure. You want to unshare your screen there? There, Jim, or is that you? Yeah, okay. So maybe somebody in the group here could sort of fill me in too. I first showed up at Paul Smith's 1980. When I showed up, it was the cookie was mounted in the library there. It was on the shore of the lake at the time. And I remember looking at it and reading Gould Hoyt's hand lettered historical events on it. It started, the earliest ones were in the late 1600s going up to 1971. So he had world wars and world events in there. And so it really made an impression on me. And I think it did for a lot of people who used that library. Maybe we paid more attention to that than some of the books, right? Because it was there in the lobby, easy to see. So it kind of became an iconic representation of the college even then. Part of the culture, I think, followed on Buxton's lead of being secretive about it. I remember library staff and admissions people frowning on anybody telling the story of how it came down. It was just sort of, oh yeah, there's a piece of our emblem, and look how old it was. And here's some historical events to help see it, right? So, and we just sort of left it at that. Well, then when we got the new library, and things changed, the cookie went into storage. And just a few years ago, I'm not really sure why it struck me that we got to do something about it. I think during the naming, that was it. It was during the naming crisis we had.
You brought
And
it out during reunion.
Yeah. So, and again, some people here were involved with me thinking, well, you know, like it's getting so contentious. Why don't we at least remind each other of what we have in common, our shared heritage and what we love about this place? So I thought, well, we do have an iconic thing, right? Why don't I bring out the iconic slab and put it there in the library where people will see it and at least give us a sense of common heritage here. So that's where I had to track down and find out where the thing was. And Brett McLeod, who's been sort of following in Gould's footsteps, had been just keeping an eye on it in the forestry cabin. It was packed away in a back closet there, safe and sound, along with Gould's signs and things like that. So it was in fairly good shape, but it was also kind of messy. The resin had been oozing out and ruining the finish, and it's cracked and all that stuff. Well, I guess so that put it on my radar. And then just a couple of years ago, I thought, well, someone's got to put this back in the library. It is so iconic. Like you don't really notice a stump where it used to be, right? So this is really the visual remnant of that heritage. And I thought, well, we should put it back in the library. And so little by little, you know, in the abundant spare time, I figured, well, the first thing is to get it refinished. And so David Simmons volunteered with a bunch of his students and spent weeks refinishing one side of it. And then this gigantic slab is sitting there in the tool room for a while. And I found a place for it in my paleo lab. And I'm thinking, well, someone should measure the tree rings and see if there's a climate signal in there, you know. Well, eventually, long story short is we had that help from Dave Simmons and his forestry students. I had some science students piling on, measuring the tree rings. We didn't find any climate signals. I enlisted Corey Laxon, who's sort of following in Gould and Ruth Hoyt's footsteps, and Don Kirschnau too, as the historian or the memory bank of the college. And so I figured, why don't we got it refinished, we'll put it in the library, but what about Gould's list? So it was great and everything, and it's part of Gould's legacy, but I figured this is bigger than Gould. Let's refinish it with a fuller story that focuses on events and people who are specifically related to the history of the college and the hotel and the site, and go back the full length and be more inclusive too, culturally and gender and all that too, but just make it more focused on our heritage here. So Corey helped me come up with things to put in there, and so did other faculty. So to wrap up, gosh, what was it? I guess a year ago. Now my brain cells are too old that I'll show you some pictures here of students helping me finally getting this thing, monstrous thing, out of the paleo lab where I'd spent a couple of months adding on the labels and stuff. So I assume maybe someone speak up and let me know if you can see. You can see the screen share, okay, somebody?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah. So it's a giant heavy thing, and I couldn't carry it. and I was afraid it would break. So then rather than bother the facilities people who were busy, it was between classes. I just walked out into the hallway and said, who wants to help move the leaning pine? And so these students just piled in and did it on the spur of the moment. And they were behind masks, so I don't even know some of their names. We put it on a cart, wheeled it over to the library. They helped shove it there in the corner. And there they are, all proud to be part of Paul Smith's history now. And then we mounted the revised panels with the history on there, starting here, working up through time. These are Gould's original wooden panels, but the print is new and the content is new. And then we've also added another panel here in the middle explaining what it is. This is the leaning pine, symbol of the college, who had a role in helping to finish it and things like that. So I encourage you to come see it. It's beautiful. And it's in this little nook as you walk in the reading lounge of the library. Look over to the left where the windows are, and it's in a little alcove between windows. So there you go.
Thanks, Kurt. Backing up for just a minute, when the individual confessed to the state troopers, he told the story of the process he went through, his story of the whole night. And he did tell the troopers the same story somewhat that Leonard Flath had told me. The student mentioned that when they were done, they walked up to Route 30 and then they turned right to get back to their dorm over by dorm 10. And that's all part of the confession from the individual that actually took it down. So then one of the last parts here is what happened to the lumber from the log of the leaning pine. And I was pretty much set on this with one story, but again, after talking with Heather recently, I'm going to say that there's conflicting stories. So here they are. Peter Crowley wrote an article in the Adirondack Enterprise on July 20th of 2001. And it talks about the lumber in there. And he quotes Gould quite a bit in this article. And I specifically asked him, I asked Peter, did you personally interview Gould Hoyt? Wanted to make sure it wasn't second or third hand information. He said, yes, he interviewed Gould Hoyt. So in his article, Gould, he relays the story about how when the tree came down, at some point, Gould was asked to clean up, get the log off the ground, take it away. And the college also asked him to take down another tree or two because they ended up with 3 large logs on a truck. And Gould was quoted as saying, "It's the most wood I've ever seen on a truck," in the article. And Gould also told Peter Crowley in the article that Gould said that he did not mark which log was the leaning pine. And so, again, in the same article, Gould was quoted as saying, quote, "Any slab of wood argued to be from the leaning pine has a 1 in 3 chance of living up to its advertising," unquote. So the logs went to Hazelton Lumber in Wilmington, and Paul Pillis recommended, he says, why don't you go there? See Charlie Hazelton, see if he remembers anything. So off I went to Hazelton Lumber last November, I think it was. I know it was before Thanksgiving. And, going there, I was saying to myself, this was 50 years ago. Is Charlie gonna be around? So I go in, introduce myself, asked, is Charlie around? And The woman there says, no, Charlie's down in Florida, but his son Sam is here. So Sam and I visited for quite a while, and Sam called his father down in Florida, and Charlie didn't remember the story of the logs going there. So it was worth the effort, but sort of a dead end, I guess you would say. The second story that, in talking with Heather, is Hoyt gave a piece of lumber to Frank Bambera, class of 74, and specifically told him that it was from the Leaning Pine. Don't have any time frame of when he gave it to Frank, but so there's two stories there, and you can decide for yourself where that goes. So Frank, with that piece of lumber that he got, made a beautiful violin case that Heather has in her office right now. Steve and I were with, Brett McLeod a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the Leaning Pine, and I think what Steve asked, was there any kind of a scientific test that could be done to confirm if one piece of the lumber was from the Leaning Pine or not? Because we know for sure the disc is a Leaning Pine, so that would be where we would have to compare it to. And I don't know if you remember, Kurt, I asked you that same question probably a year or so ago when we were in Heather's office. And you want to mention something about that, Kurt, whether that could be done or not?
Yeah, let's see. Trying to see if I can see myself on here too. So in theory, yeah, if the tree ring should be unique to individual trees, if there were scars and stuff. The problem with this would be if there were two other trees cut right next to the Leaning Pine, they would have had similar climate conditions and probably growth conditions in those forests too. So they probably would have a very similar ring signal as well, similar pattern in the rings, which is what you look at kind of like a fingerprint, right? Would be unique to an individual in one sense if there had been fire scarring or something, but the comings and goings of weather from year to year should do that. So without having, like, even if you did that and you thought, well, it's pretty close to maybe what is in the cookie, you'd still need to know it was in those other two trees to compare and see if they had a very similar signal. So I think really we're left with the cookie as the definitive remnant. And then, it's still exciting to have a piece of lumber, you'd say, thinking that there's a 1 in 3 chance, right? The story is embedded in that wood anyway, and they were neighbors of the pines and they were witnesses to what happened. So there is a Paul Smith's legacy, even whether it was directly from that trunk or not.
Well said. Thanks, Kurt. So I'm sure there's a lot of rumors that people might have been hoping were resolved or still have questions about. I don't pretend that this is the end of the story. This story can continue to grow. If people want to send in information, write a story or so, and this continues to evolve. If there's enough interest in it, maybe we would do an update on the Leaning Pine story on a story hour at some point. So this is some of the stuff that I have found and enjoyed sharing it, and we can put it out to questions, Heather.
Okay, let's take a look. I did have someone say something here. Russ Wagner. Any idea of the stats of the tree? Height, DBH, angle of the lean? I knew Kurt would be back.
Yeah, I think it is. I think the angle is documented somewhere. I don't remember if it was written in the Paul Smith's, the James Woods book, I mean, I believe the height has been estimated. I don't know how accurate it was. I don't know about the diameter. Yeah.
You can measure the cookie there. One thing I would like to know though is how high up on the trunk that cookie was from. When we made our little list of dates and things, we put down that, you know, this innermost part of the ring is where the thing sprouted, right? But of course, technically, it's probably not where it sprouted, right? That would have been lower down the trunk. So I wonder if anybody knows here in the group, even which part of the tree the cookie came from. Was it the stump still in the ground, cut off the top, or was it from the log lying down? Or even how high up from the ground that might have been, because that'll give you an idea, you know, the extra years that would have been missing in the story of that cookie. Anybody remember or even have a sense of how high up the cut was? Probably what, axe height, right?
This is Jack. I'm trying to recall how high the concrete or the cement that was placed in it to stiffen up the base. I think it went fairly high up. When I say fairly high up, I mean, I think it was at least, you know, 4 feet at least off the ground in terms of the concrete. So it would have to have been above that, I would think. And if we know the form factor of white pine, we could probably figure out where it was, I'm guessing. You know, one time I was a forester. I'm not anymore. I always tell people in a former life I was a forester. And so that would be true. But looking at this picture that's on the screen, I would think that's probably at least 30 degrees in terms of the lean. I'm kind of guessing that, if you know, I'm guessing where 45 is, and it looks like it's about half of a 45, about, from what I can tell. Also, I want to tell you that in dorm 9, room 8, the 3 other roommates also were foresters and also had axes, and their axes were inspected as well. And one of them is Ken Lachlan. He was class of 72. Warren Woogan was the other. He was, I think, class of 73. And then the other one was from Buffalo, and I think his name was Tim Bickle. But Heather would know all of that, probably somewhere in there. And she just
Sure. Right off the top of my head.
she just gave me a look. Tim Bickle, and he came back. He was he didn't graduate. He came back to make up classes so that he could graduate, if I remember correctly. But all the axes were inspected, and based on what you said, Jim, I guess those footprints did lead to 9 and 10. Dorms 9 and 10. So I guess that's why they concentrated on inspections up there. And in 1970, when my axe was inspected by Gould, very hard graded. I mean, he was very much a stickler as to the cheek and, you know, the sharpness. And I had a double. Oh gosh, what is it even called these days? I had a double axe, you know, and one of them was the cheek was for splitting and the other one was for chopping. And he was a very tough grader. And we also had to turn in our steel-toed boots and our hard hat for inspection. And so that's what I recall of that night, that when it was done, when I was a freshman. Of course, I was a sophomore when it happened that time. But anyway, that's my 2 cents. I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Yeah, I almost forgot this. This was from Paul Pillis. He was going to talk about this, and again, he's traveling, but I'm glad you brought that up, Jack, to remind me. But there was an article in the Adirondack Life magazine that Gould was interviewed for, and in it, he talks about his philosophy of grading. And in it says that Gould's was quoted as saying, if you did everything that was expected of you, you got a C. If you went way beyond, you got a B. And if you actually received an A, you made a mistake. You spent too much time away from other subjects, getting ready with your acts and that. And it's just a funny comment, I guess, that he said, if you actually got an A, you made a mistake, I guess, in your overall planning or something of your schoolwork. So
Well,
he was a tough grader. Yeah.
I want to throw in a couple of things. First of all, for those alums that were at Paul Smith's after 1995, that would be fall of 95, dorm 9 and 10 are actually Adirondack and alumni. Adirondack Burns, that was dorm 9. 10 still stands, it's alumni hall, just in case you didn't know what part of campus we were on. I assume those footprints came through the Saratoga dorm parking lot, which probably was New Men's dorm there in 72. I don't know what year it came up.
Yeah, it was, yes.
Okay. So I'd assume those
Newman's
footprints
dorm
were
was there.
around that. Yeah, I would assume though that the Saratoga parking lot had footprints in it too. And a couple of
there was-
questions that have come in.
But there was a road that came off of Route 30 that went down
there
into
still is.
the courtyard between 9 and 10. So there was a road there as well.
So, oh, there isn't a road there now. That's a walking path because, you know, we're pedestrian now. But all right, let me get to a couple of these comments and questions. Gail Fisher says, why was another tree planted to replace it since it was such a historic symbol? And another person asked, why haven't we planted another tree? Well, there was another tree planted. I don't know how successful Little Leaning Pine is, but it's there. I don't know if it's really.
Well, I do remember that they did plant another tree, but you got to remember that pines grow geotrophically, which means they grow against gravity. And this was a function of this tree had some type of, I would guess, some type of a weather event that caused it to lean over, because it wouldn't normally grow that way. It would grow, you know, perpendicular to the earth. And if they tried to make it lean, they could get maybe part of it to lean, but the top would always want to go to the sky. Anyway.
Okay. Jim Holler commented that Gould gave him the only D he ever got. Oh, Jim. Oh, Jim.
I do remember the grade that Gould gave me on my double-bladed axe, which was an 80. I got an 80 for a grade. Now, I can't remember what I did 20 minutes ago, but I remember the grade on my axe.
I can understand that. Mark Caulfield, who I didn't know was here, you snuck on. Hi, Mark. Did the snowstorm muffle the sound of the landing?
Well, I don't know, but part of the Gould felt that there were students looking out their window, watching the event happen. Now, I don't know if he referred to it at the 12 o'clock when there were a bunch of them chopping, or if Gould felt as though they were still watching out their dorm windows when two of them returned between 2 and 3 o'clock. But I did not get any leads on anyone that themselves or knew someone that witnessed it from their dorm windows, which probably would have been Livermore, I guess.
Maybe Lambert. Would you see it from Lambert House?
Yeah,
I would think.
Yeah. But that's definitely part of the story that Gould felt very strong that was happening, but I couldn't confirm it.
Someone else just commented, I thought this was going to be on the Leaning Pine Bar in Gabriel's. Sorry. I didn't know that was a thing, so it must predate me. by a couple of years. Mike Worth, so many years ago, I received a plaque of wood, and I believe the Alumni Association called the Leaning Pine Award. I was a member of the council and think it was for my involvement in the work I did on reunion weekends. Are you now telling me that I can now throw out this award? No, do not throw out that award. I don't know that the Leaning Pine Award was supposed to be made of wood from the Leaning Pine. I don't know that, but I would not throw out that award. You worked hard. Keep that.
I'll throw out a question just for anybody in the group. I mean, the culture's a little different now, whereas, you know, when you have a painful episode like that, you sort of push it aside and push forward, right? And keep the stiff upper lip and just move along and let it go. But personally, I'm fascinated to know what these fellas feel like now. Like, as a story of personal growth, redemption, do they regret it? Are there lessons we can learn that we could pass on to younger folks too, of, you know, this is what, you know, what you're feeling now, but this might be what you'd feel like later if you do something like this. You know, this isn't the only act like that, right? And we all know.
Right.
Has anybody ever reached out to these folks or ever heard anything? Are they lost now in the night and fog of history?
Well, again, Kurt, the individual that confessed, I've seen his name in several articles in a book, and the state trooper is listed, the DA, the judge that was involved. It's all very well documented. And again, I really did consider contacting the individual that confessed. And I chose not to. I didn't, you know, the kid was probably, 18-ish years old.
Yeah.
And I didn't want, like I said earlier, I didn't want to open any old wounds.
Yeah. So I wonder, maybe we should all, if we're interested, maybe talk about that, because it could be a good thing, like a reconciliation retrospective. I mean, the age difference now means those people are different people now. You know, they're like the old tree, right? The old little sapling is trapped still inside there as a memory, but this is now a tree trunk of a person who may have looked back on that and maybe would wish to be contacted and say, here's my conduit back to the college that I loved enough to be upset by. And I'll be interested if maybe we should talk about that.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Well, this isn't relating to the Leaning Pine, but Mike Worth makes a suggestion that maybe we do one of these Smitty story hours on the Stagecoach, and I love that idea. Love it. But getting to what Kurt was saying, I'm assuming that the persons responsible for the tree on the ground have regret of some sort. I look at this photo of it and it just, wow. How much longer would it have lived though? I mean, if it already had cement in it, it would it still be there today? Do you think?
It's a good question. The top was dead. One of the factors that this tree was right on top of the road. It was just a few feet right off the road.
Mm-hmm.
And Jack, you may remember too, that they never used salt when we were going to college there. I mean, you would include on campus and on state roads. We'd drive on hard packed snow for a few months and never use salt. And then I understand, I guess, that when the 1980 Olympics came, that it kind of started when the state was using more salt up there. I'm not really sure if during that period, this college did the same thing, started using salt on the road. I'm not sure, but if they did, boy, that really could have been the last straw for that tree to survive. And it would have been tough, I think, to have persisted past that salt, environmental factor. Yeah.
Well, I know that the college did sand And I don't
Yeah.
ever remember any salt. And what you said about the Olympics, because I was on the faculty at that point, and that was exactly right. They released, or they relinquished the salt requirement. They only were allowed to put enough salt in the sand to prevent the sand from freezing, from what I remember. And but during the Olympics, you literally could brine a fish on the road. There was that much salt that was placed on it, and it was a real concern on, around the ponds, and it was a real concern, even into Lake Placid, around, the West Branch of the Ausable and some of the other smaller streams. It was a real concern. Doug Fitzgerald, I saw something pop up from Doug, something about a plaque that Gould put there. And
Doug said there was a plaque by the Leaning Pine. I'm sure Gould planted Junior and placed the plaque.
Yeah, the plaque is there. The junior pine is there. When I was with Eddie Hoyt, took Paul Pillis and I right to the spot where he said the Leaning Pine was. And there's a large boulder. It's near, if you go past the little parking lot for the administration building and you go past the second entryway into it, there's right in there somewhere, there's a large boulder. And Eddie said that boulder was placed when they grounded the stump out, I guess, too, at some point. They cleaned it up and that they put that Gould or someone put that rock right where the stump was. It's right by one of the 15-mile-an-hour speed limit signs, right there.
Yep.
Oh, somebody I saw in the in one of the little windows that popped up that someone did their plane table of the campus, and then they located where the stump was. So we could find where easily, if that plane table map was still available, they could, obviously you could pinpoint with reasonable precision where that stump was. But I saw that
Jim
as a
Holler. We can. I know how to reach Jim Holler. I'll set up a meeting, Jim.
Let's confirm the exact spot. Yeah, let's confirm it.
And it is available, he says. Keith Balla, who happens to be Gould Hoyt's nephew, and comes up and works campground cleanup weekends with me. We know how to split some wood. Anyway, he said, Uncle Gould came down for a whirlwind visit. Seen my axe in the garage, came in and got me to look at it. He hung his head and cried and said, why, oh, why do people use an axe as a splitting wedge? Haven't used it that way since. Yeah. Awesome. Let me see if I missed any other comments. I think I've gotten them all. Doug gave me the how are we doing here? Hey, Steve, do you have any questions?
I do. I popped up. I wanted to ask Kurt a question. Kurt, at one point you mentioned you were looking at the rings of the tree in your class, and you said you didn't see any major climate. What was the quote? Climate change? I mean, there's got to be some climate change since that tree sprouted in the 1600s to where we are, even at 1972. I mean, can you just clarify that?
Yeah, sure. There is an environmental record in there.
Okay.
Even the approximate time when it started to lean is in there. The very innermost rings are pretty symmetrical. We're not sure how this cookie was oriented compared to the actual trunk, but there is a symmetric growth of the rings relatively soon in the life of the tree. So they're thicker on one end, thinner on the other. We were hoping there'd be a long climate signal in there. So the way you check that is you look at the recent rings and you compare them to known weather records. And we have Adirondack weather records that go back 100 years or more sometimes. So there would be confounding factors, like now having it cleared out and cars going by and all that. But there was no relation between the ring thickness and variation year to year in temperature or precip. So we said, well, probably means the same case earlier. So if there is a climate signal in there, it's probably combined with other things like what was the surrounding forest like and things like that.
Do you think the tree that just came down this winter, the tallest tree in New York that just came down, and 151 is sticking in my mind. Is that the right number?
I forget the number.
Yeah. Can we get access to that and count some rings on that and have a cookie and see if we can compare the two and maybe they were, siblings or
Yeah.
I'm curious about that. Yeah.
One of the problems with,
103. Thanks, Jim.
yeah, we thought about that. One of the problems with that, of course, is one of the reasons it came down was because it was hollow in the middle and rotten and stuff. So you won't have a complete cookie in there.
See what happens when you let a hotelier ask questions about trees?
No, it makes sense. And we've looked at some of the old trees, like in the Hemlock Grove over near Potter Pond or Marvin Pond there, the Kudish Grove and stuff. A lot of them are rotten in the middle too. So there were not a lot of, I mean, that cookie was pretty tremendous there, and we were hopeful there was going to be a nice long climate record. But so far, it looks like the only hope of that is the lake sediments that we do with the sediment cores.
Okay. And the tree number was 103, in case anyone missed that. Thank you, Jim Holler. I knew there was a 1 in there. Okay, folks, how are we doing? Any more questions, comments, stories to share? All right, I'm hearing crickets.
And I want to thank our speakers. This is another engaging topic. And having a good panel on board here, but everybody brings in their expertise, and as probably the only non-Smitty on this call, I find it fascinating. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks to Jim Voorhees, Jack Skelly, Kurt Stager, and Steve, why not? He came in from vacation, poor guy.
I'm not going to miss a story hour.
And also to the Smitties that didn't join us tonight, but did share their knowledge, such as Paul Pillis and Ed Hoyt, who gave his knowledge to Jim, and Peter Crowley. I'm sure there's some others that you mentioned, Jim, and that Doug Fitzgerald, of course. There's a couple others that I know you talked to and mentioned earlier.
Yeah, there was Mike Reichland, Leonard Flath, I called up Jim Krause, Bob Burrell,
Nice.
Heather Tuttle.
You better check
I'm
your
not gonna
acts.
I'm not gonna mention, Hans and Pam Michelin,
Sure.
Brett McLeod, Mary McLean helped out doing some research. Oh, I'll just mention this real quick. I should have brought this up. There was an employee at the Albany Museum that heard about the Leaning Pine going down. He contacted the college and asked permission to come up and make a mold, a cast of the trunk of the Leaning Pine. The college gave him permission, and he did come up and do it. And Hans told me that 20 years ago, he saw it in the museum. Well, I basically got tired of dealing with the people at the museum. I don't know how many people told me they would get back to me, and no one ever did. And I'll admit I dropped it, but it is something that I'm going to follow up on because, I'm not sure how big it is. If it's in storage somewhere, and if it's worth it, maybe we could bring it on campus on loan from the museum. So it's, kind of a little thought that I'm going to follow up on, but it's another little story on the Leaning Pine. There's a mold of it.
I wonder why they would want that.
Yeah. I don't know. For history reasons. Adirondack
Probably,
history.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Adirondack history. Yeah.
Do you think they would have taken a cookie or something?
Yeah.
Jack and Jim, maybe you could help me with this. Gerald Wolf, class of 65, he's asking about the snake pit and what happened to it. I'm pretty sure it burned, but I don't know when.
the snake pit was already gone in 1970 when I showed up on the campus.
Okay,
And so
Wow.
it had to be late 60s, I would think. The snake
Okay.
pit was like right in front of dorm 7, if I'm not mistaken. That parking lot was the snake pit.
Hmm.
I think.
all right, which one's Storm 7? Hold on, let me think.
Hillside.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know the new names. I just know new girls dorm, new men's dorm. The only one that had a name was Livermore.
Livermore and
Lambert
Courier.
House and
Longton
Baker
Cafeteria.
House.
Yeah.
In Longton. Well, that was a cafeteria. All
Right.
right, Gerald, I hope that helps. I can look up some information when I'm on campus and see if I can find that out. And if not, I'll send a message to Don Kirsch. He'll be able to tell me what happened to the snake pit, I'm sure. Any other questions, comments? Otherwise, I'd like to let our panelists go, and my dog is begging me to go outside.
Someplace in my magical mess in the basement when I moved from Bloomingdale to New Jersey, I had a chunk of the leaning pine that was on my desk in Cantwell for a long, long time. And I know when I packed up that office in 1985, that chunk came with me. So someplace in my magical mess, I do have a chunk of the pine from where it hit the ground, or one of the chips that came out of the trunk, or I do have a piece of that pine
Wow.
someplace.
Anonymous attendee, who I don't know who you are, but Snake Pit was the right of dorm 7, which is Hillside, and it burned. Peter Frank said, according to Gold Hoyt, it was used to make the old growth trees in the Adirondack display. I brought him photos of it. What are we talking about? That mold? And then Peter also says, I also reached out to the State Museum and got no response. What a
Yeah,
bummer. What a bummer.
I've got their names.
Well, maybe I'm next. David Knoll said Snake Pit was still standing in May of '66. Okay. So it was gone by 70, so something happened. And how many people were on the call? I think at the height of the show, we had 41 or 42 to anonymous attendee. Okay.
Well, thank you. This was great. I enjoyed
This was a lot of fun. Thank you all. Thanks to everybody who joined us, our panelists. Bruce says, this brings back memories. I drove from Gabe's and saw the tree on the ground. I do have 2 small pieces of the leaning pine. Thank you for tonight. Now that's Bruce from the class of '72.
Well, Bruce, I hope you're going to show up for our 50th reunion.
Yeah, seriously. Gosh, isn't that coming up soon? I know we have more than 100 days. We've probably got like 130 days or something like that. Yes, I'm looking it up right now. How did I not look that up before we started this call? I must be losing my touch.
All right, Bruce.
Oh, and Bruce plans to. Excellent.
All right.
We got another question here, though. Lots of people recently on alum sites. Okay, so John Casadante, and John, I hope I'm saying your name right. I apologize if I'm not. He said lots of people recently on alum sites, I assume he means social media, when this was a hot topic recently, claimed to have pieces of the tree, and even that Silva plot signs were made from the lumber. Huh. Goodness. I can't imagine.
1 in 3 chance
1 in 3 chance, that's
at
right.
most.
Someplace in my magical mess in the basement also is my silviculture plot sign, which was out at the old Boy Scout camp. Lanfear Scotch Pine, number 9. Lanfear Scotch Pine plot number 9. That was it. Yep.
Okay.
Like I said, I don't remember what I did 20 minutes ago, but I remember that silviculture plot very, very distinctly.
So I say, all you members of the class of 72, gather all those memories up, bring your pieces of the pine and we'll reconstruct it. Or we'll just talk about it in 133 days, live and in person, right on campus.
Thank you, Heather.
right.
All right. Thank you all, everyone, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again, hopefully on April 7th, when College President Dr. Scott Dalrymple will be our guest speaker. But until then, take a look at our recordings of previous Smitty Story Hours available on our website. This recording also will be available. Give us a few days to figure out the techie side of things, and we'll get it up there. And thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks for all that research, Jim and Jack.
Absolutely.
Take care. Take care,
Thanks,
folks.
everybody.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good night,
bye.
all.